session. So I'm going to go ahead and formally begin the session. Again, welcome. My name is Alfred Ayub. I'm with the Office of Admissions here at Columbia Climate School. And during our session today, we are going to cover application tips and strategies. That is the spirit of this session, is really kind of going over the application process and also hearing from current students in the MA in Climate and Society program to better understand how they approached the application specifically. In terms of briefly reviewing our agenda, we're going to go ahead and provide formal introductions for our panelists, allow them to share a little bit more about themselves. I will then deep dive into the application components, specifically all the requirements. I'll also have a little bit more of a in-depth conversation surrounding transcripts. And then we'll bring back our panelists again to speak about how they approach specifically the letters of recommendation, as well as the statement of purpose. And then finally, we'll go into an open panelist Q&A. And one thing I just want to emphasize, again, the theme of today's session really is thinking through application tips and strategies, thinking through how to approach the statement of purpose, who do you approach for letters of recommendation? But I also understand that it's not often that you get a chance to speak or ask questions of 5 current MA Climate and Society students. So if there is a programmatic question, feel free to ask that as well. But again, the driving thrust of today is about the application process. But I still cannot manage to prevent you from asking a good, solid program question. So feel free. Okay. Another element I just want to note, please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. That's the feature that we are using today. And I just want to emphasize that the more questions, truly the better. The more questions you ask, the more information you're going to get out of us. And it's just going to be helpful for everybody participating today. So questions are a good thing and we encourage it. If a good question comes to mind, please feel free to ask. Now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our student panel. And allow them to give more formal introductions. But joining us is Claire Morneau, Joey Ayala, Lily Ann Root, Zega Ross-Work, and Vishal Manvi. And let's go ahead and start with, on the upper left, Claire, if you could share with us a little bit about your academic and professional background prior to joining Columbia Climate School. Just a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Claire. I'm from Toronto, Canada. And I did my undergraduate at Yale. I studied global affairs, so I didn't come from like an academic kind of environmental sciences background. After my undergrad, I then went to work at Boston Consulting Group in their Amsterdam office and did primarily climate projects with them, including a report on natural climate solutions. And after 2 years there, I decided I wanted to go back to school. So I applied to this program and I'm very happy to be here now.
Excellent. Thanks, Claire. And Joey?
Yeah, so I'm Joey. I am from Clearwater, Florida. My background is a bit all over the place, so some of you might find it interesting. I started off working in the military. I did international intelligence work for about 6 years. In 2019, I got out and pursued an undergrad in public health at the University of South Florida. And that kind of oddly translated into working with a climate organization that did some consulting work with the city of Tampa on a climate action equity plan they were working on. And I also moonlighted as a farmer at that time. And that kind of all drove me here, with my interest in the intersection of like public health, climate change, and food.
Excellent, Joey. I love the non-traditional background. It's awesome. Lily?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lily. Similar to Joey, I also have a bit of a non-traditional background. My undergraduate degree was in hotel and tourism management. So following undergrad, I worked for Marriott and then elsewhere in the service industry and with startups, including WeWork and an urban farm and luxury concierge work. I am currently working for a flower company in addition to being in school. So happy to also chat about juggling work and school at the same time. But yeah, I'm excited to be in the program now and share whatever help we can.
Thanks, Lily. And Zega.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Zega. I'm from Washington, D.C. and Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. So I graduated actually just in May from Georgetown University in DC. And similar to some of my program mates here, I didn't have a direct background related to climate. I was studying anthropology with a double minor in economics and environmental science. So kind of later in my undergraduate career did I more consciously start to integrate more climate and environmental aspects to my academic journey. And I think that was also helped by some of the internships and things that I was doing through undergrad that sort of led me to this program, which I'm happy to talk more about too.
Excellent. And last but not least, Vishi.
Hi everyone, my name is Vishal Manvi. I'm from Mumbai, India. I too had a sort of an unconventional background. I worked with international news agency AFP for around 7 years, reporting on Indian economy, and then eventually transitioned to reporting on climate change, disasters, and climate policy. After that, I did like master's degree in Boston. I spent 2 years taking classes at Tufts and Harvard, specifically like on topics adjacent to climate change or some policy classes, but I did not have specific specialization, and therefore I chose the climate school to focus on climate science, anchor it into my climate communications or any policy work that I would do in the future. And I'd be happy to talk about transitioning between different schools or just transitioning from adjacent disciplines like journalism, communications into policy work. So yeah, nice to be here.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for our panelists for joining the session. I am going to pivot back to them, I promise, but first I'm going to just give a little bit more overview on the application requirements to help kind of anchor our conversation. So in terms of the kind of the admissions committee's review, I want to talk about holistic review and what does holistic review mean? So our admissions committee takes a holistic approach when reviewing candidates. Specifically, that means that they're looking at every single component of your application and carefully assessing it. This is not a formulaic process. I'm going to emphasize this again later, but there is no, for example, minimum GPA that immediately prevents somebody from being competitive for this program. Our admissions committee is really going to be looking at your academic ability. So of course that goes into the idea of your academic coursework. What did you study, your academic trajectory? We're also going to be looking at your commitment to climate change, and most importantly, fit within the MA Climate and Society program. So often I have one-on-one appointments with prospective students, and the number one question they'll ask me is, Alfred, how do I set myself apart in the admissions process? What is it that the admissions committee is looking for? Well, what I always like to emphasize is, remember, the admissions committee obviously is looking for candidates that can perform well in the MA Climate and Society, that can succeed in the curriculum. But what they're also looking to do is develop a very diverse learning community. They're trying to think, what can you lend? What perspective will you lend to the MA Climate and Society learning cohort that's going to be unique, distinct, and enrich the overall classroom learning environment? And then finally, what will you gain from the program? What kind of benefits is our curriculum going to help with you and your future goals? In terms of the required application components, we do have an online application form, and in that online application form, you'll upload your resume. You'll also upload your unofficial college transcripts. I have a couple slides that will go into a little bit more detail shortly on that. We also require 2 letters of recommendation. I just want to note that we do not accept more than 2 letters of recommendation either. So that's something else that you want to be mindful of when you're selecting recommenders. Who's going to be providing you the strongest letters? You only have 2 individuals to select for that. You'll also upload your statement of purpose. I find this the most exciting component of the application process. And again, our panelists are going to deep dive how they approach that. And then finally, for any students joining us today where English is not your first language and it was not the language of instruction in your undergraduate university, we would require an English language test. And we have 3 different English language tests as options. One would be a TOEFL, an IELTS, or alternatively the Duolingo English test. We just need one of those English language test, and I'll talk about that shortly. And then finally, we do have some students that have taken a GRE, for example, or even a GMAT. And while we do not require a GRE as a part of the application process, if you did take the test and you feel that the score is representative of your abilities and you're particularly proud of them, you are able to self-report scores in the online admissions application. And then you will also have to send us the official scores as well if you do decide to self-report scores. I do want to note, though, that a GRE is not a required component, and you should not look at it as providing you an advantage if or that you need to submit one, that you need to take a GRE. It's an optional component. In terms of our application deadlines, we have two. The first one that I want to highlight, and the one that I encourage everybody joining this call today to take advantage of, is the priority deadline. That's January 15th, 2024. Decisions will be released in the month of March. And then it's also highly recommended for any of you joining us today that are interested in climate and society fellowships or climate and society fellowship considerations. Those fellowships are specifically merit-based. They do not require a separate application. Approximately 50% of our incoming fall 2023 cohort received a climate and society fellowship. And again, if you're interested in that fellowship, it's highly, highly recommended taking advantage of the priority deadline. And then our final deadline is March 1st, 2024. So now I'm going to just briefly talk a little bit more about our transcripts, because there is a little bit of nuance and instruction we certainly like to provide in the admissions office just to make sure that you have a smooth application review process. So in order to receive an admissions decision, we only require you to upload your unofficial transcripts of every post-secondary institution attended. So what I always like to stress is, let's say you went to Borough Manhattan Community College, you received your associate's degree there, you then ended up transferring into NYU, received your bachelor's degree, and then you attended UC Berkeley for an architecture program, let's say. I'm giving you a nice, fun, exciting education history. We would need all three of those unofficial college transcripts uploaded into the application system. Again, unofficial being that you have them on hand. They're in your, they're not official because they're not coming directly from the institution. So when you list those three institutions, you'll upload those transcripts, and the transcripts need to make sure they include the course titles, the grades received, the duration of study, and the degree or diploma received, if applicable. Something that we also see some candidates do, and we want to discourage this, do not list schools that are not colleges or universities. We've had a couple students that have taken courses through Coursera or edX for non-credit, just for their own professional development. Don't list those programs if you did not take them for credit or for grades. Also, do not list information relating to high schools or secondary schools. We're only interested in colleges or universities with which you attended. In terms of international transcripts, there's additional nuance here. So if you did attend an institution where English was not the language of your university, and let's say the transcript itself is not in English, we will need that unofficial transcript accompanied by a certified English translation. And the translation must be literal, so word for word, and a complete version of the original record. And again, you would upload the unofficial transcript in the original language and then the English language translation to our application portal. Now, one thing I always like to note is that if admitted, international students will then be asked to submit WES evaluations, the World Education Services, and that will be required for institutions outside the United States. Specific instructions will be provided for electronic submission of official transcripts after you've accepted the offer of admission. So again, international candidates, we will make admissions decisions using unofficial transcripts. If you're admitted and then decide to enroll in our university, we will then need a WES evaluation. So again, that's only for candidates that ultimately wish to enroll in the university. I will say, though, that we do have applicants at this stage. Let's say you're applying to multiple graduate schools and you decide that, listen, while I'm doing a WES evaluation, I may as well send one to Columbia Climate School as well. We will accept it as well at this stage in the process, but we always like to note that a WES evaluation is not required for admissions decisions, for admissions consideration. It's only required after a student's been admitted and decides to enroll. In terms of standardized tests, we do have minimum test scores as it relates to our English language tests. Again, it's required of students whose native language is not English, and the bachelor's degree is from an institution where English is not the primary language of instruction. We would require either the TOEFL, the IELTS, or the Duolingo English test. We only need one of those. Scores must be taken within 2 years of the application deadline, and official scores must be received by the application deadline as well. So, for example, you might have taken the test in, let's say, October of 2022. You'll self-report that you got a 100 on the TOEFL. We would want that official test score sent to us, let's say, by March 1st, 2024. You also want to make sure that you use the correct school code. The TOEFL has the school code D114. And then we do have minimum test scores associated with these English language tests. So some students say, why do you have a minimum test score? It goes without saying that this is going to be a rigorous program. All courses are going to be taught in English, and you need to have a strong English language foundation in order to succeed within the MA Climate and Society program. So we would need a 100 on the TOEFL, a 7.5 on the IELTS, and then finally a 135 on the Duolingo English test. Again, reiterating, we only need one of these scores. So now I'm going to touch on letters of recommendation. I always like to stress for letters of recommendation, we only have 2 that we allow for you to provide names and email addresses. You want to choose people that you know well and interact with you in different capacities. There's another nuance I have to note that's a Columbia University minimum standard, and that's that if you were enrolled in a university within the last 5 years, one of those letters of recommendation should be an academic recommendation letter. So, for example, from a faculty member. And then the other recommendation letter can be professional or academic. Now, any of you joining the call today, if it's been more than 5 years, then you're able to use strictly professional recommendation letters, for example. That's not a problem. Ideally, letters should address both your academic abilities and your experience, and of course, potential in the climate space. And I also like to stress when you're approaching recommenders, ask if they have time to write you a strong letter of recommendation. Do not ask somebody to write a letter of recommendation with a 1-week turnaround time. That's not appropriate. I highly discourage that. You should start thinking about your recommenders now. You should start performing outreach for recommenders in this month of November. If you're planning on pursuing the January 15th priority deadline, you want to give them plenty of time to write a strong letter. And another thing I always recommend is, especially if a recommender you haven't connected with in some time, schedule a Zoom appointment, schedule a coffee outing with them, provide them an overview of the program of interest, share with them what you've been up to. Some students even share with them their statement of purpose to really anchor their understanding of the student's goals and motivations, or the applicant's goals and motivations. A final note before I allow the panelists to take over and share how they approach this: recommendation letters must be written in English or translated into English, and all letters must be submitted directly using the system-generated link. So when you're filling out our admissions application, you're going to provide the name and email address of your recommender. Bear in mind, the email address needs to be professional. So it should be, for example, if it's a professor, it should be a .edu account. If it's a corporate professional, it should be their professional email account used. You'll provide that information, and then the recommender gets an email with a secure link directly from Columbia Climate School. All letters must be submitted directly using that link, and please refrain from asking relatives, family, or personal friends or classmates to write these letters of recommendation. So with that being said, I said you're not going to hear me as much. You did end up getting a good chunk of hearing me, so my apologies on that. But I'd love to hear now from our panelists, kind of, how did you select your recommenders? How did you approach it, the recommendation letter process? Any tips that you'd like to provide? So maybe just because I see you on camera now, Vichy, do you want to share with us your approach to letters of recommendation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the question. So, I had the option of either relying on academic references or professional references because I had a solid chunk of work experience, and I hadn't spent a lot of time in academics in the last, say, 5 years because there was an overlap that was happening. So, one of my recommendees was from my previous institution, and I had taken 2 classes with them. So, they knew the quality of my work. They could speak at length about my progress within the climate space, the policy space. And I had also worked with them on a conference as well. So they also knew a bit of my working style and my passion specifically for issues of equity and justice. The other reference came from one of my recent internships that I did in Washington, D.C. And the reason I chose very recent references, even professional and academic, was because they had seen me transition from my journalism background into policy, specifically in the context of where was I trying to map out my future career, be it coming to the climate school or just my previous experiences. And it made absolute sense to me to have these two people who could speak to different components of my professional life, my academic life, and also merge them together. Thank you.
Thanks, Vichy. And now, Lily, can you share with us a little bit about your approach?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Similar to Wishi, I had the option of not having academic references because I was more than 5 years out of undergrad. So with that, I considered a lot of former managers who I had a good relationship with, and who knew my personal interests, because this is part of a career pivot for me. So it was important for people to be able to speak not just to the work that I have specifically done, but the work that I'm most interested in. So I had a former manager from WeWork who I kept up a relationship with after my leaving the company, who was able to write one. And then I actually did end up using an academic reference because I have kept in touch with my undergraduate institution by sitting on committees in New York City. And so I had one of the deans from my undergrad experience, right, or recommendation for me as well, which worked well because he knew me not only from my time as a student, but from the work that I've done post-graduation in keeping up with the institution.
That's great, Lily. I was just going to ask, did you schedule a meeting with them, the academic recommendation, just to give them a more bigger primer on kind of how how you came to this conclusion? Because it was a pivot.
Yes, we had a few meetings actually to talk through everything as I looked at various schools, because Columbia was not the only one that I was applying to, and what I was looking at each specific school and what I'd be hoping to get out of it in each situation.
Excellent. And Zego, what was your approach?
Yeah, well, so I, like I said, kind of recently graduated from undergrad, so I was very much in an academic environment. So naturally, I wanted to get a professor, at least one, on the letters, and so I kind of had a number of potential professors that I could speak to, and I've always kind of tried to make a habit of keeping in touch with people and also sharing. I think, like Lily mentioned, sharing your journey as well, and your future plans, and grad school was definitely there. So it felt like a pretty natural ask or part of the conversation, because they kind of understood my vision, that I was interested in climate and energy systems. And so they kind of were really supportive in that sense. And then I also, unlike Vishy and Lily, didn't have like super extensive work experience, obviously being an undergrad student, but I did have at the time, I guess, a recent internship, a policy internship working on energy policy in the U.S. Senate in D.C. And so I was able to ask my manager there if she was willing to write a letter, which she was, and I thought that just made a lot of sense because of the subject matter of the job, and she would be able to give it a different aspect of who I was. So I would have kind of the academic side and the professional side, and I thought that was a cool mix.
Excellent, Zega. And Joey, how did you approach the letters of rec?
Yeah, so I was kind of a late bloomer in undergrad. I graduated at like 25, so I did have to have an academic recommendation, but I didn't choose any professor that I had in a conventional sense. I chose somebody I did independent research with. Reason being because we talked about things at length around systems thinking in a much bigger way than I think we could have in a classroom in a one-on-one setting. And I think that lent the situation more towards deep thoughts that I've had about climate change and how society works around it. And I thought that would be a really interesting perspective rather than someone who gave me, a conventional letter grade on something. And then my second recommender was the sustainability and resilience officer for the city I lived in. I spent a lot of the time in undergrad networking, meeting that person who introduced me to the job I had. And that was, I think, really important for my application because the city was, in the genesis of considering what climate change means to them. And I got to take part in those conversations. So I had someone who knew my commitment to climate change and the work that I was actively doing for them. And I think that was like super solid for a recommendation.
Absolutely. I remember that letter, funny enough. Anyways, but yeah. And then finally, Claire.
Yeah, so I since I did graduate kind of 2 years before I applied, I also had to get an academic recommender. So my academic recommender was I did a capstone in undergraduate. So I asked my capstone advisor, and we had kind of stayed in touch over the 2 years since I'd left school. And I think I chose her because we had obviously worked very closely together when I was in school. So I thought she could really kind of write a good letter of recommendation. And then I also had a letter of recommendation from my project lead, like my direct boss at work, who I had done an 8-month-long project on a climate topic with. And we had many conversations about like my interest in going back to school and studying climate change. And I think she kind of helped me shape my thoughts around that. So I thought she would be a good kind of recommender as well. And then for both of them, I obviously reached out to them pretty far in advance, just to give them time to craft their letters.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, actually, does anybody, I love that, Claire, you kind of put a little bow on that because I kept emphasizing it. I'm assuming, does anybody know, do you remember when you started reaching out to recommenders? Because I know I wasn't born yesterday. I love how Lily's like, listen, Alfred, I was looking at multiple programs, let's be honest. But when did you guys start really targeting recommenders? At what stage? Was it around now? Would it have been November or even before?
Yeah, I think I personally kind of had, I think a 2-month window where around November, I think around this time I'd reached out to my recommenders.
I
Yeah,
will second that.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Joey.
No, you got it. You got it.
I was going to say, I also reached out around this time. I know that with holidays, end of semester, and then winter break, a lot of professors go offline. So I wanted to make sure that I had everybody locked in ahead of the new year.
Yeah, just to echo that, I don't see an issue with reaching out to people very early. Like, even if you end up not wanting them to be your recommender and you find somebody different, that's a conversation you can have over an email. So basically as soon as I got out of my first info session, I was started reaching out to people.
Excellent.
I did the same. I started reaching out at end of October, just so factoring in all the holidays. And once I had a confirmation from both my recommendees that by first week of November, they said yes. So I knew that I had 2 months to prepare other application materials and then follow up with them, meet them for office hours, or just get on a call with them to answer any of the questions they might have. So that window sort of helped in having a very comprehensive review of everything that they wanted me to answer.
I will add also that both of my recommenders requested to see my letters of purpose and what I was really looking to get out of each program. So similar to Wishy, I had to make sure that I had everything in place on my end to share with them for them to do what they needed.
Excellent. Excellent. So, so another nuance I just want to briefly mention as it relates to recommendation letters, and then we're going to pivot into the statement of purpose, is, when you're filling out the admissions application, you will be asked whether or not you wish to waive your right to access your letter of recommendation. And some of our candidates get a little confused on this, so I want to make sure we address this now. So if you waive your right, what does that mean? You will not be able to view the letters of recommendation submitted, even if you're admitted and enroll in the university. Again, if you waive your right, you will not be able to view the letters of recommendation submitted, even if you are admitted and enroll in the university. Alternatively, if you do not waive your right, your letters will become part of your student record, and you will have the right to inspect that record, including your letters, if you're admitted, and most importantly, choose to enroll in Columbia Climate School. So again, if you ultimately become a matriculated, enrolled student at Columbia Climate School and you do not waive your right to review the letters, then they become a part of your student record, and you could review them. It's very important to consider this, and it's possible you would want to broach if you are opting to not waive the right to review it, you might want to broach that conversation with your recommenders in advance to ensure that there's no questions or concerns. Because remember, after you plug in their name and email address, they're automatically going to get that secure link from the Columbia Climate School application system, and it will indicate to them whether or not you decided to waive your right to review the letter. So what you don't want happening is an uncomfortable conversation with a recommender saying, I'm not happy that you didn't waive your right. I anticipate all of my the people I write recommendation letters to waive the right. So some students feel to be on the safe side, you waive your right. Ultimately, though, the element I just want to stress is it's up to you. It's your decision. And the other element that's most critical is your decision cannot be reversed once selected. My colleague Damaris Diaz is on the call, and she works with a lot of our applicants with application questions and a lot of operational questions. And occasionally we get those emails where students are asking, can we reverse the decision once I selected it? I didn't intend to say I do not wish to waive my right. We're unfortunately unable to reverse it. So be very thoughtful in your approach when you're thinking about whether to waive your right or not waive your right. In terms of the statement of purpose prompt, this is the most exciting portion of today's presentation as far as I'm concerned. So the prompt is, I would say the diplomatic way is robust. Please share the key experiences that have contributed to your commitment to work on climate change issues. In addition, what are your academic and professional goals, and what knowledge and skills are you hoping to develop through enrollment in Columbia Climate School? Finally, why is enrollment in Climate and Society critical in helping you achieve your goals? And which Climate and Society core course are you most excited to complete? That last element, that core course question, I think is something that some candidates do overlook, and it's something critical. You want to address which of the core courses you're most excited. Perhaps it's dynamics, maybe it's the mitigation class, maybe it's adaptation, maybe it's quantitative methods, but be thoughtful in thinking through which of the core courses you're most excited to tackle while in the program. In terms of the statement of purpose, I want to just reiterate that this is your voice in the application. I always say that the application's a painting and the statement of purpose can serve as a frame. It's an opportunity of self-reflection. It's truly the admissions committee hearing directly from you about your journey. And a question that comes up a lot among committee members is they'll oftentimes say, what's the student's climate story? What is the purpose or the reason behind wanting to enroll in a program like this? What's their climate story? Who are they? Why are they passionate about climate issues? You want to articulate your goals. What are your objectives, and how do you want to make an impact? And of course, demonstrate how the MA in Climate and Society will help you specifically in achieving those goals. So with that being said, and actually, let me just briefly note the statement of purpose. These are some basic do's and don'ts, but you definitely want to edit and seek feedback. Remember, this is a writing sample. So by all means, dedicating time to making sure that this is a well-crafted document only behooves you. You want to clearly articulate your fit within the MA Climate and Society. You definitely want to start early and brainstorm, and then share your academic, personal, and professional trajectory. Those are all solid do's. What you don't want to do is copy and paste a statement of purpose for a different program. It happens. I hate to see it. I know that you guys are applying to multiple institutions, as you should. You're all ambitious and motivated, which is totally understandable, but you want to make sure that the statement of purpose that you're uploading is crafted specifically for that program. So I hate to see a statement of purpose that might list a different school. So just make sure that you avoid that. You also don't want to summarize your resume. You don't want to say, in 2015, I worked here, and then I did this, and then in 2016, I did this, and then we have your resume. You don't need to summarize it for us. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't pull out elements of your resume that perhaps were critical in forming your decision for joining this program. By all means, there's going to be elements of your professional history and academic history that inspired you to do this. You'll want to expand upon that, but you certainly don't want to summarize your professional work experience. And then also, you don't want to use space sharing information that's already in your application. So in terms of, I want to now just go back to specifically the student panel, because I think your voices are the most critical when helping our applicants think through their process. So my first question is, how did you decide on a topic or structure for your statement of purpose? And what brainstorming process did you use to figure out what you wanted to write about? And perhaps you have a compelling climate story, so we would love to hear it here. But if we could actually begin going back to Claire kicking off for us. Claire, how did you approach the statement of purpose?
Yeah, so I think I did kind of a lot of reflecting on why I wanted to go back to school and why I was interested in this program. And I think the way I ultimately ended up shaping my statement of purpose was I wrote about my work experience in climate consulting and how my interest in climate change developed. And then I focused on kind of the key parts of the program that I was super interested in. So the courses I was interested in, kind of the takeaways I thought I would take from the program. Because what I had identified in my work experience was that I had this gap of kind of background, no background knowledge on climate change. And I thought that was kind of the key thing I wanted to get out of this program. So I hope that made sense. But basically I wrote about my work experience and the knowledge I was missing that I was hoping to gain from this program.
Absolutely. And there is, Claire brings an interesting profile in that she was working in the climate space as a climate consultant, and she's feeling that she has gaps that she's hoping to pursue. That's we definitely see prospective students with that similar profile. So that was very helpful, Claire. Joey, how did you approach it? How did you approach the statement of purpose and what you wanted to reflect and highlight?
Yeah, so I was also working in the climate space at the time in a way that I directly interacted with people every day who weren't necessarily familiar with climate change. And that honestly helped me a lot in writing, because the same process I used to appeal to people who were being affected by it, I could transition that into a story about how I wanted to impact climate change. I think that's kind of a big point in writing the statement of purpose, is not only what you could get out of this program, but what you have to offer. And I think the second part is, because I had a very unconventional background in terms of working in the climate space, I was able to tie a lot of different experiences together into the climate story. And that's important, even when you become a student, because climate change is such a broad topic that you will have to find points of focus and ways to interact with climate change, the larger backdrop to industries. So just to give a specific example, I worked in military intelligence in the Middle East. And a big point I talked about was desertification and resource extraction from the region and how that correlates to climate change. So yeah, just tying all your experiences together and then saying what you have to offer because of those experiences.
That's an excellent example, Joey. And Lily, how did you approach it?
Yeah, I thought a lot about how, if I were to go back to school, because I was dissatisfied with my career path to that point, what I would do with it, and where I would hope to be a year from them. And so I sort of framed it through the lens of, why does this matter? And why will it matter not just for me, but how I can impact others with this information. Something else that I really liked about the program was that it has an analytical and STEM component. With my background in hospitality, I was very removed from that sort of work, to say the least. And so I talked a lot about the benefits of being in a program that has various dimensions to it, and that it would help create a more well-rounded path forward for me.
That's excellent. And then Zago, how about you? What was your statement of purpose approach?
Yeah, so I think for me it was kind of simple in the sense that like Lily, I'd applied to some other programs as well, but I think my basic kind of story, or my kind of reason for being interested in climate change is kind of the same. Having sort of witnessed climate impacts living in Ethiopia, and then also thinking a lot about clean energy because of hydropower development in my home country as well. So that was that context, and that sort of story has always kind of remained the same for me. And I think that was an important driver. And so talking about that and relating that to some of the aspects of the program and how I felt that could help me make a difference in my own community, and for also for my future goals as well, kind of articulating that sort of your past, and then your, talking about the program, and what you hope to do once you graduate and go through with that. So that was quite important to me. And it's also funny, by the way, that you mentioned Alfred, not to like summarize your resume. Definitely don't do that, but I think it does. I will say, at least in my case, it helped me to kind of talk about some of my experiences professionally or academically, things I was involved in on campus, and kind of illustrating how I felt those sort of added to sort of my profile, and kind of what they said about me and my sort of interests and commitment to the program. So yeah.
Great. Yeah, no, absolutely. And Zaga, you're 100% right. Your experiences are informing your desire for any graduate program. So I don't mean to say ignore the resume. It's an important document, and there's going to be elements of it that are absolutely going to help anchor our admissions committee in understanding your motivation. So absolutely, that's a great point. And then finally, Vichy, how did you approach it?
Yeah. So for me, a statement of purpose was an opportunity to combine my personal climate story with the professional one, because I had lived experiences being in Bangalore, or living in, because my grandmother is a coffee estate, like she is a farmer specifically. So I was living there, and I had those experiences understanding the issues of social and equity that a lot of people from different communities face. And then I chose to become a journalist. So I was actually talking to people, narrating their stories, and documenting all of those social ethnography. So I tried merging those two things. And additionally, I also had to rationalize and showcase in my personal statement that I was continuing my education. So I had done a 2 year master's, and then I was going for another master's. So there was a continuation that was happening. So there were multiple rubrics that I was working around with. So personal storytelling, and then making a justification for why do I want to specifically focus on this program. And the narrative that I used was that I was missing the climate science element and the quantitative elements from my previous background. And this program would anchor it and help me pivot to a specific career pathway that I intended to go into. So having a very clear idea, going back and forth on, my personal motivation really helped me. And I also took help from my previous mentors, and even writing consultants at my previous school, because it was sort of like a lot of brainstorming, fine tuning, because you only have 1,000 words and you have to do the best, of whatever you can offer. And finally, one advice I would give is make sure to structure your narrative in a story format, and make sure that things that are really important to you come across very clearly in clear language.
It's helpful as well. One more question, and then I want to open it up definitely for the Q&A. Is there one person that you shared your statement of purpose with for feedback? And if so, what type of feedback did you get? I know that a lot of students will write the statement of purpose, and then they'll hand it to somebody and ask them to summarize, okay, what did you get out of this? And that can give them the necessary feedback to make sure they're hitting home the points that they want to emphasize. But I'm just curious if any of you did solicit feedback on your statement of purpose for graduate school. Maybe if we can begin with Joey.
Yeah, so I definitely rushed the process, which I don't think everybody should do. But I had one person look at it, my wife, and reason being, one, because it was easy, and two, because she has like no background in the climate space at all. So, but like does have a really solid background in like the professional space. And I think a big goal of coming out of the school is to say like, I want to work in climate. So like I was really good at saying, here's what climate change means to me. I want to make sure I could deliver that to somebody who maybe wasn't so familiar though.
No, excellent example. And sometimes you don't need somebody, you want to make sure that, hey, is it well written? Is it a clear document? The person reading it doesn't have to necessarily be anchored in the climate space. That's a great example, Joey. How about you, Claire? How did you get any feedback or share the document in advance?
I didn't have anyone like edit or proofread it, but I think what was super helpful for me was with kind of my boss at work who had more experience in the climate space. We talked through like my motivations for kind of applying to this program and like talk through what I would want to include in my statement of purpose. So I think that was super helpful to just vocalize that and have someone provide kind of feedback at that stage of crafting my purpose statement.
That's great. That's great. And Lily, any feedback?
Yes, I am very fortunate to have a very active family group chat that I sent it off in, for better or worse. So some of those family members who I respect their professional opinions very much, and some who I do not, but it was helpful nonetheless to have them read it and give me their blunt feedback. So it was great to sort of take all of these different pieces of feedback and see what I felt resonated and be able to pick and pull from how different people read it through various lenses.
That's great. And Zega, did you share the statement of purpose with anybody?
Yeah. So one of my sort of senior seminar professors, well, I didn't actually know before that class, but he shared a lot of his kind of background and his story and his journey to grad school, which was very inspiring to me. And I enjoyed his class, obviously. So I just asked him if we could meet up for coffee or whatever, and so we kind of started, built a relationship there, and I asked him to take a look at my statement of purpose and to kind of give me any insights or feedback that he had, and he was more than willing to do so. So I think as a student, I was very lucky in the sense that I had a lot of other people who had been through this process already, in terms of alumni friends or professors or whoever might be in your kind of network. So I think I was able to take advantage of that opportunity there.
Excellent, Zega. And then finally, last but not least, Vichy, how did you any feedback did you solicit?
Yeah, so in the initial stages, I wanted a complete unbiased objective view. So I reached out to the admission center with my first draft and received a lot of feedback on the structure, the flow, if the story was making sense. And because this person did not know me at all, their opinion was mostly on stylistics. Is it answering the rubric of some the question you previously shared? Once I was done with that, the second round was with my reporting manager at UNFCCC, because they knew my work and they also knew what was I doing, and I had shared this whole choice of coming to the climate school with them. So they gave me sort of like their professional opinion on, maybe you want to focus on this aspect, of climate science, because you don't know this, or maybe you can sort of narrow down and not speak so much about your journalism background. So there was always going around and positioning different elements. And finally, in my final round, once I knew that I was in a very comfortable space with my essay and I had no issues with it, I shared it with my sister. She's also my best friend. And it was sort of like a family approval that, yes, you're ready to go now, get out. So, yeah.
That's great. Okay, I love the perspectives from everybody, and everybody's very different approaches. There's no like magic bullet. Everybody, it sounds like, took a very different approach to their statement of purpose, and clearly everybody here was very successful because they're all in the program today. So I would love to now open up the Q&A, and I can't stress enough, questions are phenomenal and we love questions. So let's go ahead and start. Feel free to flood the Q&A, although I know some questions have been answered throughout. But does anybody, should I go ahead? I'll open it. Maybe what I'm going to do is I'll stop sharing the screen and let us all just go to camera. And then I will open the Q&A that way. Let's see here. So for a good question I'm seeing here is, now I'm trying to be very particular. One moment. Okay, so one of the questions is, I have a particular interest in several professors' work at the climate school. Would including why I'm excited about their work and how it relates to my interests negatively impact my SOP, since it does not address the prompt specifically? That's a great question, Suzanne. So right off the top, one thing I'm going to just note is, by all means, you do not, by all means, you absolutely can highlight, for example, if Dr. Mingfeng Ting's work is of inspiration for you, or if our interim dean, Professor Jeff Shaman, and his background in public health is of inspiration to you, by all means, you can highlight that. And that will not negatively impact, just because it's not, we don't, in the statement of purpose prompt, we don't ask you to address any faculty interest. I do want to note, we do get candidates who will occasionally ask me, do I need to connect with a professor in advance of applying to this program and ensure my interests in research align with theirs? That would really be an approach for a PhD program or a program with a dissertation requirement. There's no dissertation requirement for the MA Climate Society, so that's not a required component of our application process to try to connect with a professor, but certainly highlighting perhaps a faculty member that you find a great deal of respect and interest in their research or their practice, that could certainly be beneficial. Let me pause there and ask, did any of our panelists highlight a faculty member in their statement of purpose by any chance? Did anybody highlight somebody if they recall? They did not. And so with that being said, but I will say this, I promise I've read statement of purposes that do highlight, certainly. So in fact, we're seeing quite a few this year now. Professor Jeffrey Schlegelmelch is being highlighted because we have a disaster risk management specialization, and he's the architect behind that. So it's not unusual, Suzanne, and it's certainly welcome. It will not hurt candidacy by any means. Is there any other, perhaps, so sorry, I know Damaris and Ian are right now off audio for specific reasons, but is there any questions that you might see in the chat box that are helpful?
I'm sorry, but before that gets answered, I just wanted to kind of jump on that last question, because I didn't like name drop a particular faculty member, if I remember, but I did, I think, talk about some of the research opportunities that I was interested in, I believe including the IRI. So if you're familiar with any particular, climate related or sort of any research opportunities or professors, and I guess you're also supposed to talk about some of the core requirements as well. I think we did that. So there's definitely opportunities there to do so, and that's kind of what I did. So.
Thank you, Zega. I see another question. I think, it's open-ended, but I think it's helpful. I'm having difficulty crafting my essay, specifically in how to connect my skills and experiences to what I will bring to the program. Is it better to focus on my hard skills or to focus more on my passions and future goals? Does anybody want to weigh in on that? How they would approach that?
I could weigh in on that. very few of my skills directly translated to the climate space, or what I'm hoping to do in the future, because this is a pivot for me. But with that said, I think that with many industries and a lot of background, there are some transitional skills that you can pull out that are perhaps good to highlight how, your perspective or point of view may be beneficial, which I definitely talked about, but I also talked a lot about my passion and why I'm driven and wanting to go in this direction and why I think it's important. And I do think that one of the wonderful things about the climate school is that people from all different backgrounds are really valued, and it's very well understood that solving the climate crisis requires people from all walks of life going in all different professional directions. And so I think that no matter what your background is, you can find something that is pertinent and makes a good argument for your enrollment in the program.
Excellent point, Lily. I appreciate that. There was another question, just throwing this out there, about research assistant positions, the RA positions for Columbia. We typically have around 30 each year. Just out of curiosity, this could be just a fun data point for the audience, not necessarily surrounding the application tips and strategies, but Lily, I believe you have an RA position. Could you share with us like what your RA position is, and if anybody else on the panel has an RA position, if they wish to share?
I am working under Dr. Skylar Walks with the DEI-AAAJ unit at the Climate School. So we run a lot of programming around diversity and inclusion, both at Columbia and in the surrounding Harlem community. So it's really interesting work about how to make sure that as we solve the climate crisis, we do it in a way that's equitable and justice oriented.
Excellent. Oh, Joey.
Yeah, I have doing a research thing too, and I'm working under Dr. Jess Fanzo. It's on the food systems dashboard. It's basically looking at data from every country ever and trying to build. It's insane how much information they have, building like really comprehensive pictures of food systems for national and subnational levels and trying to attach policy to them. I bring it up only because it's hard sometimes to understand where your specific interests rest in the climate space, but this is a perfect place to figure that out, because I would have never guessed that there was so much comprehensive data on food systems and that, the climate school would be that interested. I thought I would have to more so push for that. So it was really nice finding it.
Awesome, Joey. Yeah, she's phenomenal, Jess Fanzo. She inspired me. We did a graduate open house event, and we went up to Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory with a bunch of prospective students, and she did a talk on food systems, and it was just fascinating. She's really, really strong. Another question that came in is, do you have any tips specifically for someone applying who hopes to use this program as a way to make a career pivot and who doesn't have an extensive background in climate work? I know, Lily, you certainly touched on this. Is there any elements that you could highlight in terms of the pivot?
Yeah, I think I would just return to the idea that, there are lots of skills that exist in other industries that are ripe for transitionable skills. And also that every industry will have some form of climate touch points, especially over the next few decades. And it's only becoming more relevant to have done work in other areas and to understand what those overlaps look like. So to me, it's actually really encouraging. And I'm chatting with more and more people who agree with that perspective, which makes me hopeful.
That's great, Lily. And Alana, I see you joined the session. I'm so glad you're able to join. Alana asks, what suggestions do you have for how to best be prepared to succeed in the program if coming from a non-traditional, non-climate background? I get this a lot too. I meet with a lot of students, and funny, this panel is almost entirely made up of that, but students with kind of social science backgrounds, and there might be like a level of intimidation surrounding these classic STEM courses. Do you guys have any suggestions? I know that there's the math boot camp in the summer, but did you have any suggestions for how you best prepared leading up to the fall?
I could get us kickstarted on this one. So during the summer, obviously, I did all the boot camp, but I also started learning art specifically with a tutor, just because I was in India and I had 3 months in between, 2 different programs. And I also started reading a lot more about climate science or climate policy, following a lot more, news coming from the policy space. I sort of took a soft landing to the climate policy space because I also had the journalism background where I did a lot of reading and stuff. But then the climate space is so vast. You have the mitigation space, adaptation space, or just about international negotiations that are happening at LDC5 or even different COP summits. I had to sort of figure out where my interests lied and where did my future goals align with. And I just spent a lot of time reading, preparing for the course, and getting rid of my math anxiety because I had a lot of that quant and math anxiety. So I was just every day trying to reinforce that I can do this, and then going back and watching the videos, trying to solve things on my own. I think giving myself that time to get rid of that anxiety and work with a lot of small set of problems really help, because now when I'm in the program, we do have problem sets, we do have a lot of quant stuff happening, and it'll get much more intense in the future. But I feel like we are better equipped because we had this summer where we were doing a lot of preparatory work.
Excellent. If anybody else, feel free to add, or there was another question I just saw. Oh, go for it, Joey. Sorry, go for it.
Yeah, I was gonna go in a kind of a different direction, which is just like be prepared to ask for help. Which it's very kind of Sunday school answer, but you're gonna find so many things that you've never heard of before, from an economic standpoint, from an energy standpoint, agriculture, water systems. Like, it's too much to prepare for. But what I find really pleasant about this program is that anytime I've been like, hey, here's what's going on in my life, like, can I have this extension? So I think just socially being ready to over communicate about things is probably the best preparation you could take.
Excellent, Joey. And one question just came in. I can quickly answer it. Elizabeth asked, when I have done a master's already, will I be considered for admission to the program? Yes, we do have a number of students that have enrolled in the MA Climate and Society who have pursued other graduate degrees. In fact, Vichy is one of them on the panel, and there is a longstanding history of students pursuing a second graduate degree. Again, climate as a space is oftentimes considered a pivot for many. So we've had students who have had policy degrees, have MBA degrees, masters in management, that have then come to this program, and that will not be be a negative element of your candidacy whatsoever. In fact, it might be a unique characteristic, just to highlight. And then, oh, Cassie, I'm so glad you were able to make it. Since the program is 1 year, are there opportunities of overlap from cohort to cohort? Oh, once admitted. I'm also curious if this cohort here remembers a specific piece of advice that has stuck with you from when you applied last fall. Oh, that's a good question, Cassie. I'll say this, there is not as much opportunity I wish there was. There's admitted student events, certainly. But does anybody have a piece of advice maybe that stuck with you? That's such a good question. Everybody on this call is going to say, I had it together. I didn't need any application tips or strategies from Alfred yet. Claire?
I think the one thing that kind of stuck with me was because I didn't have that climate change or like science background, I was super nervous about that. And so I think if you're coming and like you're interested in this degree, you obviously have a passion that has something to do with climate change. So the best piece of advice I really got was just to like make that super clear in your statement of purpose. Lean into like where your passion comes from, and don't worry about not having like the scientific background behind it.
That's great, Claire. That is great. And then I'll throw this last one out there because I know we're at time. Why did you choose Columbia to maybe other programs that you were accepted to? Is there what stuck out about Columbia Climate School specifically?
I can maybe start off this discussion. So I think it's a great question, and this is obviously something that I had to contend with because I was looking at kind of different programs. And I think what I found was that I think Columbia brings you like a very unique mix in terms of the curriculum is very unique in the sense that you actually do get to explore the scientific aspects but it's not sort of like a program meant specifically for people trying to become climate scientists or atmospheric scientists. And you know, quite the opposite. I think it's very inviting to people of a diversity of backgrounds, and I think that's reflected in a curriculum that kind of offers you, you know, different aspects of adaptation or mitigation, which have maybe scientific, but also, you know, social science aspects. And then there's sort of a ton of opportunities for cross-registering across, not just within the climate school, which of course has really great electives. I'm gonna plug those. I'm in a great class on climate justice right now, with a legal professor who's incredible, but also you can cross-register with SEPA, with, I believe, the Sustainability Management Program, and a number of other programs as well. So you get you can really shape in a very unique way your academic experience. So I just want to plug that as well.
Thanks, Sega.
Some of the perhaps more boring but very pragmatic things that I liked about the program were that it's 1 year, and for me being a little bit older, I was really excited to get on the path I want to be on quickly. It has a built-in internship, and so there's work opportunities that it lends itself to. The research positions that are built into the climate school are a lovely way to make money, but also get experience. And so besides the classes and the study itself, also the way the program is built is very much to put you in the climate space very quickly, which I appreciated.
Excellent. Thanks, Lily. Well, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for giving your time. We are, you know, they're in crunch time right now with finals fast approaching. I know a lot of projects are coming down the pipeline. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Claire, Joey, Lily, Zega, Vichy, Ian on Q&A. We can't say enough thank yous for Ian Hunt as well. And I just want to again thank everybody for giving their time and kind of sharing their perspectives on how they approach the application process and just general for the MA Climate and Society program. If there are additional questions that we may not have gotten to, by all means, schedule a one-on-one appointment with myself. Ian and Vichy also help us in the admissions office, Damaris and I, so we are always available to speak over the phone or do a virtual appointment. I did see one other question saying, will opting for part-time preference impact candidacy? No, excellent question, Brianna, but you do have to have a good reason for wanting to attend part-time. And we can definitely have a one-on-one appointment about that as well. So definitely let's schedule that. And I just wanted to again say huge thank you to everybody. In fact, we just plugged in the chat box. Please email us at admissions@climate.columbia.edu. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining the session. Take care, everyone.